What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. Hopefully everyone's having a fabulous Wednesday today. Today is another kind of random Q&A one. I posted in the Facebook group a couple hours ago seeing what kind of stuff people wanted to go over tonight. So we've got a nice big list of random stuff we're going to touch on. If you got any questions as we go, as always, you can always just post in the chat. What's going on? Gabe, Crab, Michael, Crabden, Brett, what's happening, guys? Hello from the UK. I appreciate the late night dedication. What's going on, Brett? So some of the other random, I guess, kind of topics today. First one, what's going on, Shelly? Jayana, I'm probably saying your name wrong. On that note, if you guys do want to feature stuff, if you guys are on Facebook and not in the Facebook group, definitely join up. There's a link in the description below. And this is where my big list of topics are just coming from a post from the group today. So if you're not in there, you're on Facebook, join up. So happy Wednesday. So let's start with this one. Jan, how to keep a sand bed clean. That is a big one. And there's a few different aspects on this one. Thanks for picking two of my topics. You're welcome, Jay. We might even hit them all today. So how to keep it clean. So you can do it, or you can get creatures to do it for you. There is a couple different ways to look at it. One of them, you can get the sand bed siphoner and just siphon it out every once in a while. I used to do it kind of monthly. Now I probably only do it once or twice a year, so a lot less than I used to. On this tank, I don't think I've ever done it yet, and it's actually stayed pretty dang clean on its own. Now, if you have lots of sand bed creatures, Anthony, I'll get to yours 1 second. So if you have lots of sand bed creatures, I honestly feel like that is one of the better ways, like the Nassarius snails, or in my big tank, I recently got the diamond goby. He does a fabulous job cleaning the sand bed. Now, some of the gobies will make a mess of your tank, right? They'll take a big mouthful, they'll swim halfway up, and then go bleh, and then sand's all over your tank, is blowing around, and it can make a mess. I've had that with some other gobies in the past. Now, my recent experience with the diamond gobies has been wicked because he has not done that at all. He literally siphons, the most I've ever seen is an inch above the sand bed, and he's been absolutely phenomenal. So I've been really happy with him. So I think that is a great way to go personally. If you have a big enough tank and the sand bed support him, diamond goby does a fantastic job. If not, I like orange lip fighting conches. Those guys work very well. Host works really well. Nassarius snails, obviously, those are pretty common ones in sand. But basically any creatures that are crawling around moving your sand bed. Even if you have enough flow and your sand bed's shifting around, that's going to keep things pretty clean. No. Thank you. So if you are sand bed, all the kind of creatures, but basically someone to move around for you, whether it's flow, whether it's creatures. I see some people that will take like a glass cleaner and just move their sand around once in a while. And basically, like rock or anything in your tank, if it doesn't move, eventually it can get coralline and other stuff building on it. But if it moves around and gets clean, then it just never has a chance to build up. Okay. All right, so question, Anthony Chow. Is it a good idea to try and control dose kalkwasser through the kalk stir? That's a good question. I don't know if I would. I am currently trying to control dosing on top of kalk and calcium reactor. I guess you could have it turn, if you tested frequently enough, you could have it turn your kalk on and off. If you have a low demand tank, I think that would work. I have way too much stuff in my tank that kalk alone doesn't keep up, so I can't say I've tried that one, but it would probably work. But I think you'd want to test fairly frequently and have a low demand. Reef Sea Forever, any advice on Goni placement? I started mine on the sand bed, now it's reaching for light, and now my new lemon peel took a liking to, oh no, that sucks. Okay, Gonis I find pretty easy. Most of them I have kind of like the lower third of the tank. Like this guy, you can see I have a couple Gonis right there, and then you can't see because my computer's in the way. But I also got another pinky one right about there, so it's pretty high up in the tank. Both happy. I've honestly found Gonis not to be that picky. They're pretty low on my big tank, so in general, I'd say the bottom half of the tank, because you don't want to blast them with too much light. But flow-wise, they seem pretty adaptable, and I've had them on the sand bed, I've had them on rocks, and I haven't found them to be very picky at all. So they've been pretty good. Anthony, also thank you for the kelk stir, all those stir videos. You're welcome. Happy to hear the help. I call them zombie snails. Yeah, definitely. I hear that one a lot. Shelly, thank you for the $3 super chat. Hit that like button, please. Always appreciate if you do. It makes the YouTube gods happy. I would love to try a diamond goby, but I'm worried about him aggravating my trachophilia. I mean, obviously everyone's different, but in my experience, they have been very low to the sand bed. They haven't really buried any corals at all. The only slight one with my gonies, he tried to bury underneath them. So he started to build a little bit of sand around the base of them to like build up his cave. So I took some rock rubble and basically elevated my gonies up an extra inch so he had more room, and then they've been fine. That's been my only real experience there. Mackenzie, I have a powder blue tang who's constantly picking at my GSP. Any suggestions? GSP grows like crazy and it's super hardy, so honestly, I wouldn't even worry about that one. What's going on, Brandon? SPS coral acclimation process. What to do when tips brown, hair algae, peels off, etc. Okay, acros, I honestly don't even do that much. I used to go through and like drip them and do all the stuff. I don't really do that anymore for acros. I find they're pretty darn hardy. If it came from a local tank in someone, generally I will dip most acros. If it was something that I got from like shipped or overnighted or something, then I'll be a little more hesitant to dip it. I've found sometimes you can lose them if you stress them out too much after they've already traveled. Like perfect world, you would have a bit of a quarantine tank. They can be in there for like, you know, a week, settle it, and then you dip if need be, or just observation only. Smooth skin acros, those ones never fare well dipping, so I kind of give up on those, dipping those ones. But anything else I find, I generally just inspect it very well. You know, I'll take a turkey baster or a syringe and spray it off and see if I knock anything off. You know, get out the flashlight, let's give it a really good inspection, I guess, is kind of the big thing. But yeah, so for the most part, I don't even find corals really need to be acclimated. They're harder than you think. Yeah, don't dip it from legit place. It kind of depends where they're coming from. Tips on coloring up acros. I have stable parameters. Are they stable in the right ranges? One question. Generally, I find it just takes time. Like acros will take time to settle in, and as long as your parameters are stable and happy, they'll start to color up and they'll look better over time. Now, if you want to go into the trace element game, if you don't do water changes, you're potentially missing one of the major trace elements that could be affecting it. That could be a reason why a coral's not coloring up. If you do ICP test periodically and you tweak your trace elements to be in the happy ranges, then I think that's a good place to be. But if you never do water changes, then again, that's where I'd look at more dosing trace elements, right? If you do big weekly regular ones, probably not an issue for you. Dedicated Reefer, thank you for the $4.99 super chat. Much appreciated. What's a good continuous dosing pump for a calcium reactor, budget friendly? The two that I have used have both worked well. The Versa and the Comore. Those are the two I would pick. Comore FXSTP, and they have a newer version of it, as well as the Versa. I'm currently using the Versas now because I find they're a little quieter than the Comores. Like in general, I'm going to say the Comore was quiet. However, there was certain ranges between like the 30 to 4 to 35. There's certain ranges where it make weird like harmonic sounds, like you could hear like the dee sound, and it bothered me, and that's why I stopped. But basically, those are the two I'd recommend. What's going on, Michael? Rob B, Comore X2 Pro. Haven't used that one, but yeah, the Comores in general have been pretty solid. I'm looking at my red Goni, and they're peeking out. Nice. What's going on, Adam? How to keep a sump clean? Detritus eating cleanup crew. Is there even some? You could put snails and stuff in your tank, or your sump. In one of my old tanks, I remember in my refugium, it was growing hair algae off the sides and stuff. I put a nurture in there. After a week, my sump was freaking spotless. Now, if you have an acrylic sump, they could potentially mark it up with their teeth. So that is one consideration. But snails in there will do a great job. I mean, every once in a while, if you have refugium late, you might just have to bust out like the glass cleaner and just give it a scrape. If you use filter socks, obviously it's going to be way cleaner. If you have a filter roller, it's going to be way cleaner. And those are a few different things to consider. John Reef for Vermont, $10 super chat. Thank you, sir. Tuition fee for the day. I'm about to get my first coral and my tank is now 18 months old, no issues. Heck yeah. Would you still dip from Biota? I don't think I would. Biota, I think I would trust. I still inspect everything fully first. And if I see an issue, I would dip. if I suspect there's something on there, I would dip. But if you inspect it very well, you blast with the turkey baster, then I'd say you're pretty safe. If the one dip I have been liking the last little while is Polyp Labs potassium salts, I find is a lot gentler than most dips. And sometimes I'll just do like a short dip, right? Or I won't mix it to full strength. So I'll do like a lighter dip just if I'm like a little bit hesitant. And if something falls off or I see pests in there, then okay, maybe I'll take more action. But if I don't see anything, then I'm fairly confident I don't have to worry about it. Michael, how are the dose? Okay, so Neptune dose. For dosing, fantastic dosers if you have an apex. They're not standalone, they do require the apex brain, otherwise they're just a bump. They work very well with the Trident for automating dosing or off a schedule. For continuous use, I personally find they're too loud. So for instance, if you're doing an auto water change with them or trying to run a calcium reactor, they're like, meh. Like personally, they're too loud for me. If it's in your garage, you don't care, right? So it depends what you're using them in for what. Rob B's Reef, potassium chloride, super cheap. Yeah, so potassium salts, I find that works well. I found that dipping sometimes stresses corals more, especially if they're a delicate coral. It does, for sure, and that's a bit of a risk you take. Like, in a perfect world, I would have like a 20 or 30 gallon tank set up that was just running as like a quarantine tank, and all new corals, I don't do this, but this is what I would do if I had more space, and you know, perfect world, I would have like a 20 or 30 gallon all-in-one setup, and I would just throw everything new I buy in there and just observe it for a few weeks, right? Make sure everything is happy, make sure that there's no pests on it, or, you know, nothing's affecting it. And after a few weeks, if you don't see anything, you're probably pretty darn safe. And they don't have the stress of dipping and everything else. So that's would be like the perfect world, what I would do. Do you do anything specific that make your not sure what I'm doing wrong. Do you know of anything specific that'll make your acro skin peel? If your acros are turning white, aka peeling, that's generally called STN or RTN, which is either slow tissue narcosis or rapid tissue narcosis. That's usually caused from a bigger stress response. If something drastically changed in your tank and your coral can adapt to it, that's what I find kind of caused it. I did have my big massive elk swing down a while ago that was like 7.5 to like 14 point something, the biggest swing of my life, and brought it back down. I did have one coral that did recede a bit. I did have a bit of STN. And it did, you kind of see it died off a bit, not all of it thankfully, so it will grow back, but I did have some recession on one coral in my whole tank, so that was pretty good. But generally it's from some kind of stressor to the coral, and that just can't deal with it, and then the STN or RTN happens. When I do see that happening, if there's like a branch and say, you know, say this is your coral, and it's like RTNing down here, I would cut it off about a 1/4 inch above where it's RTNing or STNing, so you have your happy bit, and then re-glue that. And I found probably about 70% of the time that works, and it won't necessarily progress up to the healthy bit. So you just gotta make sure you frag it high enough up that you're fragging where it's healthy and not the infected part. So that's worked pretty well for me in the past. Jasper, getting a bubble tip anemone tomorrow. Do you have any experience with them and any tips to be successful? Bubble tips are super duper easy. Things to note though, it can and will move around your tank. So if you want it to be somewhere, it may not agree with you and it might still go somewhere else and find a spot where it's happier. So that's the one thing to know. Should I dip it? So in general, bubble tips, super duper easy. In the past, I just fed my mysis once or twice a week or just broadcast through the tank and it grabs a few chunks and then they're happy. But they'll be really happy if there's a spot it doesn't like, it'll move and find a spot it likes. So that's the one thing to know. If you have lots of acros, there's a chance it could, you know, walk over your acros and sting them and, you know, until it finds its happy spot. So keep that in mind, Jasper. Thank you for helping people around the world. You're welcome, Pedro. Happy to help. Should I dip it? Which one, dedicated reefer? If your coral is RTNing, STNing, I would not dip it because you're just going to stress it out more. I would just frag it in a healthy section above and then right off the part that's RTNing, STNing and re-glue or reattach your new one. Now the other thing you can sometimes do is move it to somewhere with lower flow and lower light in your tank and let it kind of settle in and be happier before you move it back to where it was. So I find if a coral's stressed and you're recovering it, lower flow, lower light, puts a bit less stress on it. And that can work. It's gonna be an anemone only tank. Okay, so you're good there. Good to go then. David Reed, what is your personal experience with moonshiners? Okay, so Reef Moonshiners is trace element program. Basically, you do ICP tests periodically. Some people do it monthly, some do it every quarter. I do it every like 4 months maybe. And then you tweak your trace elements based off the results to the ideal levels. And there's also like daily dosing that you can do with it to keep things like perfectly aligned. Now, I was really good with doing all the dailies for a while. Things were looking phenomenal. And then I had a baby and I've been slacking on the dailies ever since. So I don't do it as much as I should. I do an ISP test and then I'll like make my corrections, and then I'll probably dose the dailies a couple times a week, not every day. So I've been on my to-do list to like adapt it to more like once a week and just retweak things. So that's been my experience. I find it is good when your trace elements, everything's dialed in. It does, like the tank does seem to be a little more vibrant. The coral does seem happier. Like it's, you know, you're without it, you're at that 90-95%. It's that extra like 5-10% to just get that extra bit of pop and vibrance out of your corals. So if you're really happy with your tank, you want to push a bit more, it's definitely a fun thing to play with for sure. This is a good one. Grant, potential pitfalls with automation. So this is a fun one. I'm obviously overkill on my automation. As you guys know, I automate everything because for me, that's the fun part of it. Potential pitfalls. If you go away and you want someone to do something on your tank or look after it and something buggers up, that's definitely a lot more complicated, especially try and walk someone through, right? If it's super simple, it's gonna be easy walking through. If it's some crazy automation, it might be a lot trickier. Now with automation, it does save a lot of stuff, right? Because then maybe you don't need someone to look after your tank, or you don't need someone to do something because it's all automated. Now, that being said, you know, eventually everything's gonna fail, right? Over enough period of time, some gear or something's gonna fail. So it's always wise to make sure you have some level of redundancy built in so that your automation has some form of a backup, right? Like even, you know, on my ATO that's hiding behind my controller board, it auto refills itself. And there's a solenoid on there and it has its own optical switch. I have the Neptune tape level sensor in there. So I tell it to shut off at a certain measurement. Now there's also the optical switch for the little marriage saver refiller thing, and that's above it. So that works as a backup if the Neptune never fails. Now if they both fail, I still have a float valve. So I got 3 different levels in there. So I think if you are gonna go crazy with the automation, it's always good to consider a form of redundancy or backup for all the different steps that you do. And that's a big one. Like even with heaters, for instance, like I always use a heater controller, right? And then that's plugged into the Apex, and the Apex will turn off the heater controller if the heater controller is to fail. Now I also generally will use 2 heaters. If I need a 500 watt heater, I'm going to use 2 250 watt heaters. So if one fails, the other one can still keep my tank at a reasonable range. And if one got stuck on somehow, then it doesn't have enough juice on its own to cook the tank. So it's all these little things you can do to kind of add in that redundancy. And I think that's the big thing for on the automation side of things. Reef Sea forever. I went away for 7 days and had someone feed and refill my 5-gallon fresh reservoir. No issues. See? Perfect. Nice and easy. Reef Sea forever. I do use the moonshiner to do his core pop. Yeah, that's a good way to see it. If your trace elements are super dialed, you know, and you some of them slightly elevated, you can get a little more color out of your coral and like a little more vibrance or pop. And that's one of the biggest things I'd say. Ruben's Reef. Hey Reef dudes, I'm dosing ESV 2-part. I do like the ESV. Have a skimmer with CO2 scrubber, but still hard to reach over 8.1 pH. Thinking separately Kalkwasser as a supplement. What is your recommendation? If your tank is growing and it's looking good and you're at a happy place, like 8.1 is still a good place to be. Don't worry about it. If your tank is newer and you're trying to push that growth further to fill it in faster, then chasing pH has a bit more value there. Calc is definitely the way to do it. I am using it on my water box mainly for the pH purposes, and it has essentially replaced my auto top off. My auto top off I barely ever use anymore. It's off most of the time, and I dose roughly how much I evaporate using a Versa, and you know, I think it's about 5,800 mils a day, something like that right now. And I just push that through the calc just 24 hours a day. It's a slow dip, and that just helps bump up the pH overall. Midnight Reef auto water changes absolutely convinced me getting the benefits we were seeking. 10 liters over 6 hours a night, 250 gallon system, but it's adding, well, it's extracting at the same time. Yes. If you automating water changes is nice. Manually dealing with is not as fun. And if you automate it, it's gonna happen all the time, which is good. So I am definitely a fan of auto water changes. That being said, I haven't used mine in a little while. I should probably kick it back on, but I was doing like a gallon and a half a day, and I should set that back up and get that rolling again. How many pH monitors do you use on your tanks? I have technically one, which would be just the one like the Apex Neptune probe. Now that being said, there's technically also pH probe in the calcium reactor, which is for a different purpose. And then the elk testers also have a pH probe in them, so they also report pH. So I guess technically more than one, but love Mike more for auto water change. Which one do you got, Rob? Mundao, thanks for all the info on the channel. Wondering where I should keep my elk at if my new salt reef crystals mixes at 11. Currently my tank is 8.5. 8.5 is a great place to be. Reef crystals does mix high. I mean, you could use Instant Ocean, that's probably closer to 10. But in general, if you are only doing like say a 20% water change, it's not going to have that drastic swing on your elk, so you're probably safe. The only time you'd really worry if you did like a massive, 80% water change, something big. Javier, what sand do you prefer in your tank? Fiji Pink? I use special grade reef sand, Carib Sea, mainly because I do like to push the flow a bit more, and if the sand is too fine, it is going to blow around the tank. And then you have bare spots, which I still have a couple, even with the Carib Sea special grade reef sand. So I like that one because it's bigger, heavier particles, but it still looks like sand. And when you go any bigger than that, you start to get to the aragonite, whatever the word is, aragonite look, where it looks more like pebbles over sand. So that's kind of why I like to pick that one. NSB Reefs, looks like we'll be able to do Dosetronic to do auto water changes. Yeah, so apparently the Dosetronic is getting an update, which will let it run continuous, and it'll be able to do water changes, which is pretty cool. ReefDudes, just saw bite marks on 2 SPS frags. Oh no. Rest of the system looks good so far. Suspected AEFW. What would be your attack if you didn't have a quarantine set up? Okay, so acro-eating flatworms are a bugger. Potassium salts, I believe that actually does work on them fairly well to get them off. So I would pull them out, I would dip them, give them a dip for sure. Potassium salts if you have it, if not, just dip with whatever you got. Big thing is blast them off with like either a turkey baster or a syringe, something, but physically dislodge them, get them off of it, and then you can probably put your acros back in the tank. But the big thing is you got to check for eggs. Now eggs look like little tiny dots on the bottom of the coral. Generally, if you have a little prop coral, I'll have to get one. Pretend this is a coral. Now, if you have acro-eating flatworms, they'll be on the bottoms of your coral. So usually underhangs on the other side, you'll see it. And how you spot them is seeing little white patches on your coral, and that will be where the bite marks are. Now, the big thing is once they bite off that chunk of flesh, that's generally where they'll lay eggs. So if you see that white spot, there'll be a lot of little tiny orange dots. Generally, they're orange. And that will be where the eggs are. So that's the big thing. So if you see eggs, you can either scrape them off, you can super glue over top of them, or just frag your coral above the bite marks are and just put the top tip back in. So a few different approaches there. Javier, back in the day, people used to use deep sand beds. Why do you think they shy away from them now? Overall, I think because one, they can be a lot more maintenance if they can get all kinds of, I don't know if it's nitric acid, I believe it is, that builds up in them over time. And if you disturb them, there's potential for it to release some of that nasties into your tank. So I think it's more of just like a preventative thing. Like there's tons of great benefits, but there's also some risk to them. And I think a lot of people just avoid that risk in the first place. And it's also a bit of a funny one now where a lot of people back in the day, it was a constant battle to lower your nutrients. And now it seems, it's 80% of the people now are fighting to get their nutrients back up because we have so much gear and so much better stuff on it now. Where this tank's super low, my other tank's a little bit higher. So I mean, it's 50-50 for me, but I think that's a good chunk of it. What's going on, Producer Reef? Becca, mounting, fragging, corals, acros. Where to use caution and things that you shouldn't overthink. For mounting and fragging acros is incredibly easy because you can take bone cutters, snip, you're done. The bigger thing that I found is generally sometimes you break off too much, or you break off a branch you didn't intend to, especially if you're fragging something more delicate like a dragon or a deep water, or Goniopora, Montistellata. That one, same thing. It breaks pretty easily. So cautious on what you're fragging and trying to only get the one you're actually trying to get. I mean, that's always a big one. I find acros are pretty dang easy to frag. If you're, so SPS, as for mounting, I will generally just super glue them. I super glue gel, the thicker the better. And usually I'll just, glue the bottom, and I'll just find a wedge or somewhere you can wedge it into, and that works well. If you're trying to get fancy and mount this coral on the side of something, then I'll use either like a 2-part epoxy or those little like thermoplastic beads. I think Ice Cap makes them. The ones that I still have are from Marine Deeply, used to sell them. You put them in hot water and they're like, come like a thermoplastic, they're very low melting point, and you can mold it into whatever shape, and you could like build something to cup it and make little things. Like I'll do something like that if I'm trying to mount somewhere tricky. But for the most part, find somewhere that will naturally fit and then just glue it there, and the glue will hold it in. Reef forever. I use iodine to clean up the cutter. Yeah, iodine is a great one for fragging corals. And some corals actually, like if you go a bit fancier and have a diamond saw, you can actually put a bit of iodine in your water in your saw. But iodine will disinfect it, so if there is any issues when you're fragging it, dipping it in iodine after does go a long way. I haven't bothered for like a single frag, but I'm going through the effort of busting out the coral saw, then I'll have a water with some iodine to dip in after. So thanks for the reminder, great tip on that one. Stefan, starting with Kalkwasser tonight, tested my pH last night with the Hannah 7.6 pH 2 hours after lights out. Oh, free checker, very nice. What coral did you plant and now regret it? In my prior tanks, I would say it would be plating Montes, because some of them just take over. I had probably the red. The red one grew like a weed. The only one I have now is the WWC grafted one, because that one's cool. So that one's allowed. Cloves. I do like my rainbow clove polyps, but for me, they're not like plague proportions. They've been pretty good at not going crazy. Currently, the only one I guess I would semi-regret is, it's not Goni, it's the red one. That looks cool, but it's pretty mean to anything it comes in contact with. It is on a rock that's starting to grow into my main structure, and at the current moment it's not an issue, but I think one day it might turn into one. I'm gonna say that, as well as I do have these green minty zoas. I don't know how they got in my tank, but I have some in there. And they have started to be a bit of a pain and take over some other zoas, so I do want to get rid of them, and I think eventually I will. They are... I think they were called... can't remember what they're called. But that's basically, I think, the one I regret. And I might go in there with some calc paste one day and try and get rid of it. Now I'm gonna see if I can find a photo of that one, just because we're talking about it. Where's my phone screen? Okay. So it is... not the nice Gonies, it's Goniopora, I believe is what it's called. It's gotta be in here somewhere. It's super pretty and nice, but it's just a little bit on the aggressive side for my liking. Somewhere in here. It looks like little flowers. It's red with yellow mouths. Like, it's super pretty, aside from the aggressive side of it. Yeah, this guy, which is closed up right now, but it's that guy once it's open. Any more pictures? But those are the ones I would say for now. Yeah, Goniopora, that's the one. If you need some company, what's going on, oh? How you doing, buddy? Hollywood chalice. Yes, Hollywood Stunner is a mean chalice. It grows like a weed. It is the fastest growing chalice I've ever owned. And I eventually sold it because it was mean, and it has very long sweeper tentacles. So anything that's around it, it will sting it and potentially kill it, or yeah, most of the time it'll kill it. So that's one I got rid of just because it was taking other corals around it. Is there a way to reduce sweeper tentacles on corals? Hammers, the Galaxia, raise nutrients, sweepers are unreal. It is crazy how long the sweepers can be on some corals. I don't think you can do anything to reduce it on a specific coral per se, but you can control it with flow. So whatever way your flow is sucking or blowing is the way that the tentacles are going to go. So if you do a bit of planning and you know something has big nasty tentacles, you can put it, upstream or downstream, or depending where your flow is from other corals. And that's kind of the only really workaround around it. Do I ever clean my overflow? If so, how often? Not very often. It's happened, but it's not a very common thing. I do run like an intake screen on my main drain, and probably I'm going to say once or twice a year I'll take that out and clean it. Kevin, can you put torches next to hammers, octospawn? I have some very close, and they don't seem to be hurting each other. Hammers, frog spawn, octospawn, I'll say yes, they should for the most part be fine for touching. Torches are, I'm going to say 80% fine. Sometimes there can be some aggression. And I also think it might be a difference if it's like an Indo one versus an Aussie one and stuff like that. So there's a few other consideration. So I don't think it's like a cut and dry thing with torches. Generally, I'll let torches touch though. But again, if one's Indo and one's from Aussie, there's potential that they might not jive quite as nicely as the regular ones. Okay, let's go on the list. Removing cyano without a chemical additive. Okay, so cyano, I mean, something like ChemiClean is the hammer approach. It works, it's fast, and it works very well. Natural way definitely does take longer. Some say it could be because like your nutrients out of whack or something else. I've had those battles like a lot of the time. Like I'll just take a power and blow it off and let the filter roller catch it. There's other times where I'll just suck it out with like a water change hose. And, usually it'll go away. I've had some that have been stubborn and just keeps coming back. And eventually, I might just use something like ChemiClean and get rid of it. KZ does make a bacteria-based one. The little blue bottles, which is probably more of a natural subtler approach, but it does take a while for it to kick in. So it's more of a long-term game to kind of balance it out that way. Now, Blue Life, and there's a bazillion different brands that make their version of a ChemiClean. So, I mean, again, that's the chemical approach. So a few different options. Just make sure your nutrients are in check, manually blast it off or suck it out. And then, eventually you might just beat it that way. But it does take a while. So know that going into it. Now, Tommy, pros, cons of aquarium controllers. I like them because I like the fact that I can pull up my phone, check the tank, know if it's good or not. If I'm away, I can tweak things, I can check on things. I like to automate things so I don't have to do it. Because like a lot of people ask, how much time is your tank? How much all that stuff? And generally with a reef tank, the first year or so is a lot of work up front. But then once the older tank gets, the easier it gets. So now I do hardly anything in my water box other than like tweaking my dosing and refilling the containers. Like for the most part, it's pretty much set and forget it, clean the glass, feed the fish, which is good. So I like the automation part of it just because it gives me more free time. And it adds that extra level of redundancy. Mike, what's your favorite anemone? There's a black widow anemone that was in Wincy's tank that was super cool. Yeah, it looked like almost like fiery flame tips. It was really cool anemone. I did like that one. There is some like the Colorado ones that are sunburst, I think they're called, that super duper crazy colorful. Those ones are pretty cool too. If I was to do a nem tank, I'd probably do just all rock flowers. So if I was to do one now. Just the bubble tip. Got a trio of flame angels, been in quarantine for a week with only minor aggression. Wish me luck. Good luck. I don't think I have ever tried more than a single flame. Even a flame and a coral beauty. Like they got happy eventually, but they took a little while. Stefan, favorite supplement product to use and why? That is a good question, and I don't know if I have a favorite supplement. Like, because they're for different purposes. So favorite for what aspect or what purpose? I experiment a lot, so it's hard to say on that one. I will get back to you on that one. All right, Jance, should you run a Biopellet reactor? Pros and cons. I have never run a Biopellet reactor personally. They are basically balls of some kind of like I don't know if it's corn or what it is. It's some type of like a plasticky-ish element that will break down and essentially turn into bacteria food. So biopellets is basically carbon dosing. I have carbon dose, yes. I haven't done biopellets. The only one risk I'm gonna say with biopellets, if your power goes out and that reactor sits there full of water not moving for a long time, that water gets really bad and nasty. And if your power comes back on and all of a sudden you dose all that like aged, nasty bacteria water back to your tank, bad things can happen. Like that's like really bad for your tank. So that's the one thing I'd say caution with it is just make sure if you ever have a power outage, I would drain it out before it came back online. But aside from that, biopellets work. I've used more passively ones, like in the water box when I had crazy high nitrates. I used a product called Nitrate from Orca Labs, and it was these little cubey things that were essentially a form of carbon dosing, and you put a little air bubble underneath it and did it. So that was like my form of carbon dosing that I had a really good experience with. John Wright. Any idea why so few aquariums keep pyramid butterfly fish? They are more stunning than yellow tanks. Pyramid butterflies are really pretty fish, except you get one with like the really nice defined like black, white, and yellow markings. I have had one in the past actually, and I do miss them. One day I may get one again. I feel like I'm maxed out of big fish for now in my tank, but if, you know, for whatever reason, if I do, you know, give away or one of my bigger tanks bite the dust one day, then maybe I'll get one eventually. But for now, I feel like I'm topped out on my big fish. But yeah, I agree with you. Pyramid butterflies are really pretty fish. Favorite coral food / supplement. See, I mixed it up on that one, even with like coral food. You know, I like the reef roids, you know, I've tried the benefits. I feed a lot of the reef nutrition stuff for like the small particulate foods. You know, I feed mysis and cannabis. I feel like it's good to have a wide variety of stuff. If you think about it, each coral, it has a different mouth size. It has like a different preference. And if you only ever feed one thing, you're likely, it could be something some coral just don't like and they never touch it. So if you feed a variety of things, you know, maybe one day 10% of your corals eat this one, another day a certain chunk eat that one. So I'm a big fan of mixing it up, right? Like variety is spice of life, I think is a great way to go just to mix it up with the tank. They eat coral polyps. I don't know if they do, Sammy. I did not have any issues with them eating coral polyps in the past. I know a few people that have them, so I haven't personally seen it. That being said, my sailfin tank constantly nips at my purple candlebra gorgonian. Doesn't really seem to care. Like, it has a few nips, the polyps all suck in, 2 minutes later they're back out again. So it's like a temporary thing. Red Sea have a lemon peel and he's a bully. Yeah, it really depends on the fish sometimes. Spencer just picked up a 1.5 gallon Pico, planning 100% water change weekly for my larger tank, softies, mangroves. Any other tips for success? If you do 100% water change weekly, I think you'll be pretty damn happy. Like 1.5 gallons, like literally take a gallon of fresh water, dump it in your big tank, take a gallon of your big tank, use that and put it into your Pico tank, and I bet you'll be happy as a clam. Should be super easy. Just the bubble tip. Have I ever kept sun corals? Yes, I have. Sun corals are tricky because you have to feed them, and you have to train them to be out when you're feeding the tank, and you have to feed all of the heads on a regular basis. So generally sun corals I have seen, they do tend to perish over time unless you have a very, very heavy feeding regime with them. The ones I currently have, just 2 heads of now, but they are fathead dendros. And they're like a sun coral, but they're way easier to feed, and they're out in the day. They're just way easier. So if you have that option, I would go for those instead of sun coral. And if you do have a sun coral, it's just a ton of extra food and ton of stuff that you gotta have in the tank. Kevin just ordered some Biota captive bred fish, yellow tang, mandarin, pear royal gamma. Super excited. Very nice. That's awesome. Yeah, and captive bred too. Like, there's next to no issues of like parasites, diseases. They're already made for tank life in a way because that's all they know. Like, it's a great way to go. So I think I'll be pretty happy with those, Kevin. He's just like the boss of the fish in my tank. Yeah, usually there is one fish that is the big boss man. Good advice. Thank you. A buddy of mine is having issue with his tanks. All of his hammers are full extension, but his torches are pulling themselves in. Well, a while ago was full extension. Torches torches are always finicky. Like I feel like they're more susceptible to bacteria infections and whatnot. I did do the KFC dip in all mine, and since I've done that, none of them I haven't lost any heads since then, so they've all been happy. I have a few frags in this tank as well, and I can see 4 different ones right now, and they're all happy. So it might be worth doing some kind of a bacterial dip. That's probably the advice I would give him on that one, Steve. Okay, Scott, phosphate swings, how to get appropriate levels in a safe manner. Branch into algae elimination as well. All right, so phosphate. I am a fan of GFO for this one. So first, your skimmer is going to help remove nutrients. Next, if you're using refugium, again, that either Shado with like a decent light is going to help suck out some of your nutrients, or if you go the algae scrubber route, same thing. The algae turf scrubber grows hair algae, which grows faster than Shado, so it sucks out quite a bit, and that does work very well. Now, if you want to do the, I guess semi-chemically, I don't know if GFO is considered a chemical, but GFO is very effective at pulling out phosphates. Now, in my early days of reefing, I had an issue where I was dripped out too much phosphates. It was 0. I had no algae, but again, my corals were getting pale. They weren't very colorful. They weren't happy. So corals definitely need phosphate. So don't take out too much. As long as you're 0.9 or less, you're happy. If it's, over 1, then I would consider using some kind of a media to suck it back down. But GFO in a reactor is honestly the easiest way I've found to do it. Algae elimination, it really depends what type of algae you're fighting. Like in my tank, I had some hair algae. I still got right there. You can see the one rock is still hair algae, and a little bit over there. So most of it's gone. Mainly it's been dealt with tuxedo oranges. I have manually pulled some out, and that also works very well. Now the other thing I do once in a while is I'll turn off the flow and I'll spot treat with H2O2, hydrogen peroxide, 3%, 1 mil per 10 gallons is generally what I recommend. And that will, if you do that daily for like a week, you'll probably kill off the base of all the algae that's there. Been in the hobby 10 years, can't keep torches or copper bands, everything that dies. I don't know why. A lot of people seem to have issues with copper bands. I have one in each tank, so I do like the copper bands. I am a fan of them. I generally find the tricky bit is getting them to eat at first. And what I've found success with is using manila clams. So if you get manila clams from the seafood market, like on ice, like fresh ones, put them in the freezer and pop one in every few days. And I've done this on both of my copper bands as well. I have a few buddies that have done this, and it's worked for all of them. So it's, in my circle of reefers, it's been like 100% success rate. And it has worked very well for them. And both my copper bands have been super happy, healthy. Like, you can see the one guy right there. Awesome fish, love them for that. But again, now they eat frozen, so they're way easier, right? Because they'll eat mysis. But until you have them eating, prepared, readily available food, it's a lot trickier. So that's where I found that the manila clams have been like that perfect stopgap to get them eating. What PO4 levels do you think are too high? It's hard to say. I've seen tanks with crazy high ones and other ones. In my mind, 0.03 to 0.09. Anywhere in that range, I'm happy. That's kind of where I target for PO4. Happy McReefer, some of my acros are not extending as polyps. Any advice to get more polyp extension? Other acros are so hairy. Now, a lot of the time when it comes to an acro not being polypy, is something could be bugging it. It could be a fish, could be a snail, it could be a little tiny critters or a pest, it could be flatworms. There's something that's likely bothering the coral that are making its polyps stay sucked in. And that's generally the one big thing that I would say is something's likely bothering it. So it might take a little extra time and effort, but spend a bit of time and see if you can find anything picking at or anything annoying and that's doing that. Now, it's also possible it could just be not the happy level of flow or light or something else. You could also just try moving to a different location in your tank. Just a tip, a PO4 of 0.2 with no issues. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like some tanks can run really high nutrients and high flow and then high light and they're fine. But again, if you're really high nutrients, generally you'll have higher light, higher flow to kind of balance things out. But it's also an 8-year-old tank. Yeah, again, older a tank is the less it seems to care. How to How to get lower nitrate when nitrate and phosphate conditions are not balanced. Nitrate is much higher than phosphate. So sols, in my case, when I had a similar issue, that's when I used the NitroGuard from Orca Labs, and that basically just targeted nitrate. So you can use GFO to target phosphates, and for targeting nitrate specifically, you can do carbon dosing. There's a bazillion different brands. Like Tropic Marin makes a bunch of ones that are, some are for high phosphates, some are for low phosphates, and different ones. So take a look at those, or you can look at something like Biopellets, or you can look at something like a sulfur denitrator to bring down nitrates, or something like I did with like those Orca Lab ones. The NitroGuard worked pretty well for me. Raw B, I've used Nopox to get NO3 down. Yeah, Nopox is another popular one, which is essentially it's another form of carbon dosing. Darren, best way to remove vermitid snails. Those are a bugger. Sorry. So I have seen some with, I believe it was Mike Paletta, and he did something with a calcium carbonate powder. I think it was something like the coral snow from Zeovit, and he was doing that to somehow choke them out. So that might work. You can break off their little tubes, so they'll probably regrow. I mean, if you break them off and put a dab of super glue in there, that's probably one way, but it's again a lot of work. So I would potentially look into the coral snow calcium powder type of thing and see how that one goes. Mike, best recommendation for low light, low flow coral. I would stick to stuff like zoas or rock flowers and those type of corals personally for like low light, low flow. They're super hardy, nice and easy. Kind of what I look at. Dupree, understanding the lighting of the G5 and G6. How do you like the two? All of the above can be in tonight's stream. Yes, so this is a big mix today. So these are G5s that I upgraded to G6s. I am happy with them. They, honestly, G5s are still great lights. If you have a G5, it's harder to justify upgrading to a G6. I think the bigger value proposition is if you have the blues and you want the pros, or you got the pros and you want the blues, right? That's a really easy way to change the light spectrum of your lights by doing that. Now, that being said, I mean, if you're not running your light at 100%, you can get pretty much the same look out of either one, right? If you're running 50% or 70%, right? You can make them look pretty dang equivalent. So, Spencer, do you think the focus on stable high pH will take priority over alkalinity calcium in the hobby moving forward? It seems like Kalkwasser is getting a lot of attention. Yeah, Kalkwasser is probably like an easy solution that gives you dosing and boosting pH. So if you're new, you're starting out, calc, one thing to dose, and it can take you pretty far. Now, it can only take you so far, and eventually you're going to have to supplement other stuff, but it definitely does help. There is definitely a bigger focus on pH now in the hobby, and it does seem to get a lot more attention these days. Now, the funny thing is, like, I'm going to say it depends where you are in your tank. Like this tank, it's still lots of small frags. It's still growing. It's not a full-out reef. But like my water box, like some of my corals feel like they're growing too fast because their base is growing into each other and starting to take out each other. So I'm like, should I even worry about pH anymore in this tank? Like, do I care if it grows slower? Probably not. This tank, more growth would be nice. So now there's also the other argument that higher pH generally makes for healthy corals. Or if you have low pH, there's more potential for stressor events to happen and affect things. Where a higher pH, they're less susceptible to stressor events. So there's also the health aspect of it. So a bunch of different considerations. I do think pH is definitely getting more love these days because of a lot of those factors. Kevin, I have Verminid snails, got 20 bumblebees. Whew, it's a good chunk. I always find them right next to the Verminid. There you go. I've only had one single bumblebee in my tank, but I haven't had any Verminid issues, so he might just take care of them. What's going on, Reef Eco? I got a super great deal. Had a friend upgraded all of his G5s to Neptune skies and sold me Ecotechs for cheap. Sweet deal for you. I haven't seen the need to upgrade them to G6s. Yeah, it's a hard one to justify. Like, most people are perfectly fine with the G5s because they're amazing lights. G6, you get a little more color, a little more spread. But if it's worth it. If you have a G4 upgrading to it, yeah, say yeah, for sure, get a G6. But if you have a G5, unless you're going from like a blue to a pro type of thing, I find it a little hard to justify on that front. John Wright, can I reproduce copepods in my refugium by feeding them phytoplankton? Yes, you can. When I was cultivating my own pods, basically what I fed them was phytoplankton, and it works very well. So yeah, if you are actively trying to produce more pods, dose phyto, and that will definitely make a huge difference for you. What's up with your nano, Devin? I don't have a nano right now, John. I have 2 tanks, and they're both big tanks, so no nanos for now. Maybe one day again, but I kind of, when we moved the house and all the stuff, decided, 2 tank limit for now, so went for 2 big ones. Darren, brilliant. I have a calcium carbonate powder and Microbacter 7 ready for the treatment. With the cereal release calcium levels, I've lowered fish feeding and coral feeding to help starve the verminids. Again, bumblebee snails are great. I can fully speak on the coral snow methodology of doing it. I believe it was a video I did with Mike Paletta. I'm pretty sure that's who it was, if you want to go through and see what he said about it. But that's my vague recollection of what it was. I've never personally had a big experience with them, so this is kind of secondhand knowledge on it. Spencer, picked up a yellow chorus recently and haven't seen any vermitid spread since then. With guys and machines, yellow choruses are awesome. They're amazing little pest hunters. They're great fish. Sammy D, my Sky's butterfly smooth operation radions was a nightmare. Never ever connect. Never on the G4s. So I'm assuming you're talking to Mobius. So Mobius has been updated. There was definitely some connection issues initially. It has improved quite a bit. Every once in a while I'll get one. Generally I just hit retry and then it will work, so it's not the end of the world. Or just reboot the light, then it'll work. So I'm gonna say, but in the beginning there was definitely some times where it'd be a little more flakier, but now I think it's pretty solid. Was your wrasses eating vermitids? That is awesome. Need a predator tank. I don't know if they eat vermitids, but yellow choruses are great all around. Like, a lot of people say 6 lines just because they'll go after everything, but they can also be jerks. Yellow choruses I find are pretty friendly overall. Now again, they are ones that will jump, so make sure you have the top on your tank if you're going to get a yellow chorus. Yeah, John, had vermitid, it used the snow, 3 bottles, did not work, they kept growing. Bumblebee snails is going to be your best bet against vermitid. Brandy, alright Brandy, if you're watching. Our question, how to take care of the tank when you have a baby? This is where automation comes in. Having most things automated means you don't need to do much work on the tank. Like the filter roller, which lasts me, a couple months, every 2.5 months or so, change a roll, not a big deal. Maybe once a month or so, I just top off my dosing containers. As for the calc, every week or 2, I'll just take a scoop of calc and dump it in and add some more calc to it. Like, for the most part, it's pretty easy. Aside from that, the daily is feed the fish and clean the glass. Reef Eco, I'm getting a Melanaris N6 line, crossing my fingers. Melanaris are very good hunters as well. My only complaint now is my guy's getting pretty big. I've had him for a long time. I probably had him for 6-7 years now, but he will flip over corals all the time. Like he'll want to eat something and I'll find corals flipped upside down in my sandbag because he's hunting underneath them. So that's my only complaint about him, but he was great fish aside from that. Can you have more than one wrasse in a tank? You absolutely can. I have many. I love wrasses. I think they're pretty awesome. Happy Reefer, there are a lot of tiny white spirals and spots on my rock after daily dosing AV+, not sure if they're worms or snails. Those are probably I think they're called spiroid or sporoid worms. Those little tiny micro spirals is probably what you have. And sometimes if they're more not as spitty, they could be the tiny feather dusters. Do you find yourself constantly moving corals because of fighting? In my earlier tanks, that was probably one of my biggest mistakes. Because you buy all these corals and they're little tiny sticks and you want to put a bunch in there so they're all an inch apart, a couple inches, and then 6 months later when they're growing, they start to grow into each other and they fight. So now I've learned my lesson. I do space stuff out more. Probably still not enough, but a lot more than I used to. So Eventually stuff is going to fight, but it buys you a lot more time. But over a long enough period, all corals want to take that real estate, right? So either some will attack another, some will go over top of it, some will try and shade it. But over a long enough time frame, they're all going to try and have that slow motion battle for space. Chamber. Mario, baby Trocus snails all over my tank and rear chamber. Any tips on keeping them alive growing adults? I've never specifically tried to raise the baby snails. I just let them do their thing and hopefully lots of them make it. But generally, as long as there's enough algae for them to eat and nothing's eating them, I think they're a good effort that they'll probably just slowly grow up over time. My red core slips rocks constantly. Yeah, so that's the only thing about bigger wrasses, right? Is they are hunting for stuff and they're likely going to flip stuff. So make sure your stuff is glued down or attached to a heavier rock. That's kind of one of the biggest things. All right, Luke, how to get rid of Aptasia. So the two methods that I prefer for getting rid of Aptasia is one, using F-Aptasia, Frank's F-Aptasia. I find that works very well. It's basically like using a calc paste, but it also forms a hard crust. So it's like calc paste plus something extra. So you can take calc paste and inject it, smother it in calc paste, and that kills most things. Now, with Aptasia, supposedly there's a potential for it to spread. I know with Aptasia X and some of these other ones, most people say it just spreads in the tank more than anything. So that's why I like F-Aptasia, because it kind of encrusts it and makes it a little tomb. Now, if you don't have that, same thing you can do with super glue. If I see an Aptasia on a rock and a little crack, I'll basically smother it in super glue, so it creates a little super glue tomb and it can't spread, and then it's died off and it can't spread around the tank. So super glue tomb or F-Aptasia are my two go-tos for Aptasia. Or if you do something like Bergia, again, if your tank's like crazy amounts of it, you might want to look at something like Bergia and nudibranchs, because they are basically Aptasia hunters. Copperbands, for the most part, the majority of them will chow down on Aptasia as well, which works pretty well. Like this tank, I can see like two in my sump, but I can't find a single one in the display. So if there is any, I think he just takes care of them. Mario Reef Dudes, thank you for taking the time to help out the reefers. I appreciate it. I appreciate hanging out, Mario. Thank you / you're welcome. Copperband is an Aptasia killer. Yeah, most Copperbands do a great job on it. I do hear the odd one that doesn't go after it. For the most part, they were. Copperband Filefish. Filefish is another one that works pretty well. I find Filefish, they can do an awesome job in Aptasia, but I also find they can be more likely to nip coral later. So if you have a lot of LPS in your tank, it's possible that they potentially might get nipped on or picked at from the filefish if he's not, once he runs out of Aptasia. Again, that's still a possibility with a Copperband, but I find it less likely. Now, in my experience, I've had the Copperband go after acans, Micromesas, and that's the only coral they've ever seemed to touch or annoy over time. Stripies. Yeah, apparently Australian stripies are supposed to be good for Aptasia. I've never personally tried them, but I have heard that a bunch of times now. John Wright, I have a 6-line Royal Gamma, but my tank, 6 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot, good sized tank. Together for a year now, no issues. Little fallout with the cleaner wrasse, 6-line, usually times. Nice. Yeah, peppermint shrimp too. With peppermint shrimp, one, make sure you don't have hawkfish or else they're expensive snacks. Make sure they're like the proper legit peppermint shrimp and not like camelbacks or some of the other ones that look like peppermint shrimp. And it's generally best to get a handful of them because they tend to be shyer. They hide and kind of come out at night, but they will attack and go after Aptasia in little flocks. So you generally want at least 3 in your tank or a few more. So that's the other kind of consideration if you're going the peppermint shrimp route. Now, peppermint shrimp, I believe I was talking to Chris Meckley about this one where he had as a quarantine tank, because apparently they would clean up corals and all kinds of stuff. So if you had a quarantine tank with a bunch of peppermint shrimp and you throw some coral in there, if there's any pests on there, those guys are probably going to clean it up really well. Kevin, careful with peppermint shrimp. Mine recently ate a hammer polyp. Okay. Now I see this one all the time. If a shrimp or a hermit crab or something possibly could eat like a polyp or something. Now, Most of these creatures are opportunistic, and if you feed heavily, you likely won't have an issue. If you feed very lightly, because you're trying to keep nutrients down or for whatever reason, and your creatures are hungry, they're going to be a lot more opportunistic, and they might just start going around and tasting things like, what's this taste like? Yummy, polyp, right? So if you feed heavy, less issues. If you feed on the light side, there's more potential for that. And this is something I found over time with like most creatures. Same with fish. If fish are hungry, they're going to be more aggressive towards each other. If they're nice and plump and not, they're not hungry, those bellies are full, they're less aggressive, they're more docile. So it's something to consider. And this goes for fish, creatures, coral, like all kinds of stuff, right? They're, nice and plump and healthy and full bellies, they're going to be docile. If they're hungry, they're going to be more aggressive. They're going to be more opportunistic and pick at things. So food for thought. Dun, dun, dun. All right, guys, what other questions you got? We're just about at an hour, so I don't think I can go too much longer today. But if you have any burning questions, be sure to let me know. Stabilla just hit 40K. Congrats. Did I? Sweet. I have to go look myself now. That's awesome. Thanks, buddy. Dun dun dun. I did just hit 40,000. Sweet. Thanks, man. That's awesome. 40,001. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you guys hanging out and subscribing. Thanks for letting me know. Went over it. Yes. Darren, peppermints are my first choice, but I find that if Aptasia is too large, then they tend to leave it alone. Yeah, I could see that one. It's probably worth, manly hitting the regular ones. What's the favorite fish you own? That's a tough one. I do love the Copperbands, and I do love the mandarins. I'd say those two, like, visually, I think they're both stunning fish. I do love them. RC Reefer, hit the like button. Appreciate that, man. Be sure to hit it. Reefico, congrats, Devin. Well deserved. Thank you, guys. That's pretty sweet. I said 40K during the live stream. What do I feed? I'm gonna say my main staple for the tank is in the mornings. I feed nori. I just buy it from like the sushi market, just like sushi nori. Just make sure it's raw, no roasted, no additives, just straight up regular nori. Is that a Teacher for Sale ReefDudes logo? There is. If you do want some, this is one of my favorite ones. But I do have a bunch of them. They are print on demand. So if you order off my website, reefdudes.com/shop, there's a ton on there, and it's all print on demand. You can pick your design, your color, and they're as cheap as I can possibly make them. I think I make like $1 or something off them, so they're super cheap, but they're all print on demand. I think they're pretty cool. Congratulations, well deserved. Thank you, Niagara Fire Corals. Okay, so Mackenzie, what do I feed? So nori in the morning. I feed mysis most of the time at night, and I'll put in Canalus a couple times a week, which are those little tiny red particle ones that go on there. And throughout them, I will also randomly feed pellets from Reef Nutrition, the TDO. There's the oyster feast, the oyster eggs, and randomly Phyto, and there's another one of theirs that I do. And so I kind of just randomly mix it up with them. So I do like to mix it up a lot, and I do think there's a lot of benefits to varying the diet for your fish. RC Reefer, how do you like Mastertronic versus ReefBot? Still hard to say. They both are working well. Mastertronic I've had for a couple of years. ReefBot I've had for a couple of weeks. Original ReefBot eventually had a few issues with the actuator, which died, and I had to source mine and replace it. The new one, so far so good, but again, a few weeks in, so we'll go back to you once I've had it for a couple months. Super duper congrats. Thank you, Dedicated Reefer. Mark, when should I add pods to my tank? How much should I add? Add to a 60-gallon. The tank is dry right now. Well, do not add them until you add water. No, but once your tank is cycled, I'd say anytime you're fine to add pods after that. Again, if you're trying to purposely increase your pod population, it's worth dosing some Phyto. If you're watching, hit the like button. I do appreciate that one. Isn't all nori posted? I think you meant roasted. Yeah, I think it is roasted. I guess my main point was make sure there isn't like flavors and other stuff into it. That's the one that I tend to use. Just straight up sushi nori with 100 gallon, this big sheets of it. And overall, it works well. Yeah, ingredients, laver must be what the new thing is. But yeah, no flavors. That's the biggest one. Just straight up raw nori. And I put just about a full sheet in my tank daily. Generally, I'll take a full sheet and about 80% of it goes in my water box and the other 20% goes into this tank. And it keeps all the tanks happy. Actually, most of the fish go for it. I purchased a Copperband. It isn't eating very well. Should I worry about that since we're in other fish? I don't fully know what the lymphocyst is. I have to look into that one. But if it's not eating well, look at the manila clams. Just because that works well. Niagara Fire Corals, $5 super chat, 40k, congrats. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. RC Reefer, I'm on the fence about the Mastertronic. Mastertronic, I've had that one for a couple of years now, so that one, I can say it has worked very well for me. It's definitely lived up. There's been no major issues. Like, it's worked well over time. Reef Eco is exactly to take care of it. Feeding for the day. When are you going to come to Reefapalooza Orlando? I will probably do Reefapalooza Orlando next year, 2023. I think I will make it happen. It's been a couple years. I miss it. So next year, I think will be the year I'll go to the next one again. Sammy, do I feel handicapped on these reviews if you're not buying all these out of pocket? I do not, because if someone wants to send me something to review, I tell them straight up that if I don't like it, I will not do a video on it. So like, there's zero obligation, and I'm always straight up with it. So I'm honest about it, good, bad. I'm just going to tell you what my experience is, so I don't feel handicapped. And it's also at the point where I have tons of gear. I don't need anything, so I don't really care if I get stuff. And there's been lots of stuff I'm offered, and I'm like, I don't have a use for that, or I don't think it's useful. So I just say, no, thank you, I'm going to pass. And if it's something I think is cool, then I'll say, okay, if you want to send it to me, I'll definitely play with it. If it's cool, I'll do a video on it. You know, if it doesn't work for me, I'm not going to, you know, I'd talk it, but I'm just not going to do a video on it. So that's kind of how I work things. But the biggest thing is I always find, like, straight up, just be genuine and here's my experience and straight up. So it's more value for you guys, and that's how I like to roll. Copperband also responds to mastic smashed into a shell. Huh, I have not tried that one. It's definitely another good one to try. God bless you. Have a great night. Thanks, Eddie Reefer. You as well. What have I found here? Howdy, everyone. What's going on, Travis? How long does it take typically for coralline to start covering rock? My tank is a little over 3 months. Coralline algae needs to be introduced into a tank. It has to come from somewhere. It can be a snail shell, it can be a rock, it could be coralline from another tank, but adding a source to the tank will help it start spreading, and it has to get there somewhere, right? So I know originally I got a couple snail shells out of someone's tank that had a bunch of coralline. I literally rubbed all over my rock, and that's how I originally started spreading in my tanks. Would you recommend 2-part dosing and Kelquas or dose overnight to help stabilize pH? I'm swinging from 8 to 8.3 during the afternoon. I'm currently dosing 2-part, 24 mil for 24 hours. It definitely works well. I personally just dose kelp 24/7. You might be able to level things out a little bit more if you only dose it at night, so it basically levels out the dip. But I found it simpler to just dose it 24/7. When I was trying to dose, some stuff at night and some in the day, like I found I had more elk swings and I wanted to stabilize it. So that's kind of where I dialed it more, just to be consistent all the time. Sid Battle Reef and Bills, thank you for the 99 super chat, buddy. I appreciate that. Larry, do you quarantine fish? If not, have you had any struggles with parasites? That's a good one. I did not quarantine fish for many years, and I got lucky. I had no major issues. Eventually, it caught up to me. When I was moving tanks, I had a bunch of my stuff in temporary tanks, and someone was importing some fish, and they had a gold angel, super cool, rare fish. I'm like, oh, sweet, I want that. He did. So I added him to my temporary tank, and unfortunately, he was carrying something nasty, and he took out almost every fish that was in that temporary tank, which sucked. And if you heard that in the background, including Bob, which is my powder blue, which I loved, and so did my wife, so that sucked. So after that, I did start quarantining all my fish after that. So I didn't for a long time, but eventually caught up to me. So now I would, if it's buying from random source, I would definitely quarantine it, unless I'm buying it from somewhere like a store that pre-quarantines it and runs copper and all that jazz, then I probably wouldn't. But if it's from somewhere random, then I would for sure going forward. So I definitely learned my lesson, and you know, eventually it will catch up to you if you don't quarantine. So it's definitely a good idea. RC Reefer, Copperbands love clams on a half shell from Reef Nutrition. Nice. Cody Spencer added tons of frags and snails with coralline. Take 10 bottles of coralline algae in a bottle, not purple up. So coralline also appreciates alkalinity, right? And it's going to suck it up, alkalinity and calcium. So if you're dosing it and keep those levels stable, that will also help accelerate your coralline algae in a new tank. So other food for thought. Pickle B, should I start dosing kelp safely? Yes, kelp is basically giving your alk and calcium one solution and helps your pH, so it's a good easy way to start. RC Reefer, what's your favorite flow setting on the MP40? Reef Crest is pretty much my go-to now. I used to go and schedule a bazillion different modes, different times of the day. Now, honestly, I just run Reef Crest. This tank, I believe, is running around 25-30% Reef Crest. And on my big tank, I think I'm running 75 to 83%-ish on the water box with MP60s. So Reef Crest is basically my go-to, and that's what I use 24/7. Building a 40 breeder, I can't figure out which overflow style to use. Any suggestions? I'm a fan of the bean animal. Basically, you have a full siphon drain with a gate valve. You have a secondary drain, which is just a trickle and an emergency. That's always my go-to for building a tank. The gate valve and your full siphon lets you tune it perfectly. Your trickle just rolls over the edge, keeps it super silent. And then that could be emergency if you only have 2 drains, but you have 3. I just like the extra backup one. Never had to use it, but just in case, it's an extra peace of mind. Reef Eco, saw a worldwide corals video. You and Lou had a real problem with dosing 2-part with calcium reactor. Any issues with that? I dose a little sodium carbonate, calcium from pH. So I am doing that right now. I believe it was Lou that was saying that in the video, or no, it was Victor. And he said not to mix them, which I kind of chuckle a little bit because I'm doing that now. They said to like stick to one form of dosing, but I have a calcium reactor, calc, and 2-part all on the same tank. It's all going. So I personally have not had any issues, so I would be curious to have a chat with them. I should lure them for a live stream and dig into that one day. Javier, how do you like the water box? I can't decide from the Reef XL or the Infinite model. I've been very happy with my water box. Fit and finish, you know, like the glass overflow, like all the little things on it have been very nice. Like it's been a great tank. 0 complaints. I've been super happy, and I would definitely get one again. So I could recommend it. Thanks, Dev. You're welcome, Cody. Do you do auto water change? If so, what percentage week do you do export at the same time? Okay. Auto water changes, not at the moment, but yes, I was for a long time. I will probably turn that back on soon. I was doing, I believe it was 10,000 mils a day, so that is what, 2.5 gallons off on a 200 gallon tank, and that's what I was doing. Now, I don't personally worry about taking out and adding at the same time. Yes, there's a slight inefficiency to it, but it's a few percent. It's not enough to worry about. If you're sucking out, then adding, yes, you're 100% of that portion water change instead of like 97%, whatever it is. But then you got to worry about your ATO and other stuff. Or if you're sucking, adding at the same time, your tank doesn't miss a beat. Nobody knows. Your sensors don't know. Everything's happy. So that's personally the way I went. In your opinion, what's the most underlooked, overrated surgeon fish? Research ever? Lavender tang. I wouldn't say it's underrated. I really do love powder blues. I mean, I do love the purple tangs. Underrated for a small system, the white-tailed bristle-toothed Tomini tang. Those guys are awesome algae eaters, and they say smaller. I'd say they're underrated for smaller tanks. Javier, you part of any reef clubs or anything in your reef community? Sadly, there isn't much of a reef club where I am. Pre-pandemic-y times, I did organize with another buddy some like just going out for wings and chatting reef stuff, which again, should probably get that going again. It's been a while. It'll be fun. If there was a bigger club, I'm sure I'd be in it if there was one locally. This is my club, live streams. Welcome to the ReefDudes live stream club. This is how I get my Reef Geek fix. John just had to say thank you for sharing your knowledge and your viewers for all their help. we're happy. We're happy to help, John. Thank you. Hope you know how much you appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate you guys hanging out and supporting me as well. How much fluid do you have going through the geo? I'm about 50 mil per minute. I think I am roughly around there as well. I am going to check. Water box. Calcium. I am currently at 112 liters a day. No, I'm at 78 mils a minute right now going through my geo. Yeah, so that's, 78 mils a minute. So 112 liters a day. So I have a good chunk going through the geo right now. What are your thoughts on bristleworms and the best way to hunt and remove them? I have a few I'm aware, but I don't like to remove them personally. You can, if you really want to get rid of them, there is bristleworm traps. I honestly have not seen a bristleworm in my tank in ages, so they might be in there. My old tank, I definitely had them. I personally wouldn't overly worry about it. They're still a good cleanup crew, right? They're cleanup crew. If you feed your tank heavy, you're probably gonna have a lot of them. So if you overfeed, that's a thought. But I would build a bristleworm trap, usually some kind of container with a bunch of little straws through it and some food in the middle, and they'll go in to get it and they'll have a hard time getting out. So that's the easiest way to remove them. Thomas Orr, what's the difference between soda ash and sodium bicarbonate? One of them has a big impact on pH and the other does not. So I honestly always forget which one's which, but basically one of them is better for doing big adjustments on the tank and the other is better for dosing because you have that little bit of a pH boost. Resi Forever, I have a purple stripe dotty that eats the baby ones. There might be a fish in my tank that eats them, I'm not sure. But yeah, arrow crabs, they'll definitely eat them, that's a good one. Coral shrimp. And some wrasses can all eat bristleworms. Yeah, there's possibly, I don't know what, but I haven't seen any in ages, so it's possibly something in there eats it. Alright guys, I think I am going to call it for today because I still got grow shopping and other fun stuff. Raw B, bicarb is low pH. Okay, there you go, that is the difference. Thank you guys for hanging out today on today's live stream. I do appreciate it. Yeah, hitting 40,000k during the stream, that's pretty awesome, so definitely love that one. Larry, are there any reefing conventions in Canada? There was one in Calgary last month that I did not make it to, but there is one, and there was also one in Niagara Falls that I was to a couple years ago called the Niagara Coral Show. So there's a couple, there might be others, but those are the only two I'm aware of so far. Dances with Fishes, thank you for the 999 super chat. Hate bristleworms, love reef dudes. I agree with you, thank you. Alright guys, I appreciate you guys hanging out today. If you enjoyed it, as always, hit that like button, make the YouTube gods happy, and I will see you guys